Let's speak to Baroness Claire Fox, who joins us down the line. Good afternoon to you, Claire. First of all, and we'll get on to Lord Frost in a second and the political fallout from that over the weekend. Just your sense about where we're at. The scientists this morning, and I say the scientists, most scientists, certainly connected with SAGE, seem to be saying the government don't really have time to wait, that if we do wait, it will be too late when it comes to potentially imposing restrictions to try and bring down cases. I see that hospitalisations in London are up 42% in the past week.
The percentages are quite high, but the numbers are not quite high. So it's important to untangle that. The other thing is that when they say it's, if we wait too long, that it'll be too late. I think that we all know that this new variant is throughout the community, spreading rapidly, and as yet, certainly and thankfully, not creating serious health problems for most people who get it in comparison with the numbers. So, we've got to be careful when you say too late for what. I mean, it all sounds very scary. And yet, actually, the data and the evidence is not there to suggest that we need to overreact or panic. And just when you say about, the speculation is they might bring in restrictions after Christmas, I've heard this 27th of December mentioned. Can I just point out that for a lot of people, that isn't after Christmas, that's mid-Christmas. Most normal people have Christmas at home with the close family, and then they spend time visiting extended family and friends and so on. So actually, if they bring it in on the 27th, and certainly if they're talking about bringing in level 2, which the rumour is, and your very own Tom Harwood said that too, that is incredibly prescriptive back to April 2020 when we hadn't got such mass vaccination. So I am concerned that there's pressure to react and they're overreacting.
I suppose my point about it's too late is, and this is why it's a really tricky for the government, is that we know people get infected, and I think then the average time, if you are very sadly going to get a severe illness from this, from potentially ending up in hospital, can anywhere from a week to 17 days, or 10 days to 17 days. And that's why it's quite difficult to judge, isn't it? Whether because if you leave it too long and then you take action, actually it's probably too late because the infection rates will then be even greater.
But the problem is that when people say, look at the evidence, and I'm looking at the international evidence. I'm talking to people who are looking at the international evidence. And as yet, what we are doing at the moment is saying we've got to close things down because it's possible that this might be a serious illness, but there's no evidence of that yet, but it's possible. And this is completely in contradiction to living with and so on and so forth. Now, it seems to be the case that what we're basing everything on is the worst case scenario. And we've heard the way the forecasters and so on have been using worst case scenarios. And I'm suggesting that there are other non-COVID costs. I mean, goodness knows what's happened to the hospitality industry. But also you talk to any cafes, any taxi drivers, anyone who's in the public sphere who have to carry on working, but actually there's no one around. People are self-regulating. For a start off, they've been frightened or they're frightened of catching it. And the other thing is that what people always say is the services won't count. And that's partly because of rules, not because of the variant. So what happens is you get you get it, you're not even ill. So people I know who've got it, they're not actually ill, not very ill, but they can't leave they're in isolation for 10 days. And of course, that's the rule, not the virus. That's the rule associated with the virus. And it's going to bring society to a standstill. I just don't think it's the right way to go.
Let's move on, Claire, if we can, because it's not the only difficulty facing Boris Johnson. And one of the reasons is that we think that Lord Frost quit the government at the weekend was over COVID restrictions. Though it must be said, he's been a pretty key ally of the Prime Minister, particularly when it comes to Brexit. And there is somewhat glee, it seems, in Brussels about his departure from the government, that Frosty has melted, I think, is what one official in the European Union said about it. Are you concerned that Lord Frost will not be leading these negotiations, considering they're far from over?
I'm totally concerned. I mean, I have to say that since being in the House of Lords, the one person that's been in the House of Lords I've been totally consistently impressed with is David Frost. He actually has to give a monthly question and answer session to the Lords, and He's been robust. He knows his brief inside out and backwards. He's one of the few people that I've got a real trust and believes in sovereignty, has completely been steadfast in relation to the European Court of Justice and saying that it cannot have jurisdiction over Northern Ireland, and that would be a breach of sovereignty, and knows as detail as well as the broad philosophical points. So, only on Thursday, he did a briefing. He answered questions, and he was just as good. And the House of Lords is full of a kind of ultra Remainer, led by Andrew Adonis, but loads of them. And they kind of have a go and have a dig and talk about rejoining and blah blah every day. It seems to me, and he always sees them off intellectually. And he was only doing that on Thursday, and very reassuring it was too. So the fact that he resigns a couple of days later, I can tell you, if you're a Brexiteer, it makes your heart sink. And the problem about Liz Truss getting the brief is that you just feel it'll be part of foreign policy. It's a kind of deprioritisation of Brexit at a very time when actually got some considerable negotiation needed to resolve the protocol issue.
But in many regards, the protocol, you're right, still has to be worked out. But shouldn't relations fundamentally be treated as a foreign affairs issue? I mean, if we're going to move to a world which is essentially post-Brexit, we have to make it a normalised relationship with the rest of Europe, having a single government department devoted to it. We don't do that with anywhere else in the world. Seems a little far. Doesn't it make sense now?
I'm not suggesting that this goes on in perpetuity, and nobody else would do either. You've made the point that this is mid very serious negotiations. There are a range of aspects of the deal that are not yet resolved, right? Fisheries is one of them. All sorts of details need ironing out, and the protocol is the most acute. And at the heart of those deals and those tensions and those resolutions is the key questions around the sovereignty question. And I'm suggesting that until they are resolved, then it can't just be a normal part of foreign policy. And by the way, the UK might want it to be and would want it to be, but the EU are actually insisting on their sovereign right to have a law court have a say over the laws of Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. Regardless of whether one thinks it should or shouldn't be, it is. And therefore, it's a breach of sovereignty and a breach of Brexit. So I'm afraid that I do not, in the long term, fine, but not now, no. So, yeah, I'm nervous about it because I trusted him on that question. I don't know him or anything. I've just seen how he's performed. And I think it is significant that he has walked away, because I kept seeing rumours in the paper and briefings and so on saying ECJ, softer line on the European Court of Justice in Northern Ireland. You ask Lord Frost, he says absolutely no softer line. And then you still see a briefing. So I think we can work out that he was not feeling backed up by his mate, Boris Johnson, the Brexiteer.
OK, Claire Fox, thank you very much, as always. Baroness Claire Fox there, joining us talking about these restrictions and Lord Frost. And as I say, we are still waiting to hear what the fallout from that cabinet meeting might be.